Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Ed Fries. Quick introduction, because if I do a long introduction, it'll take the full 30 minutes. So Ed coded some games as a teen in the early 80s. He then started working at Microsoft, working on Word and Excel. Lucky you, Ed. But then he led the team that created the first Xbox and shipped over 100 games. That's not that bad, right? Ed then left Microsoft in 2004 and has been involved in everything you can think of. He's now at One Up Venture. So Ed, I hope you enjoyed the Next Gen Tech track, if you were able to attend some of it. This is our fireside chat, so I'll be asking questions to Ed of my own, but also please go to the Q&A tab and put your own question there. So I'll go back and forth with your questions. So Ed, bring us back to memory lane on the first Xbox launch and how it compares to this year or this week's next gen launch.
Yeah, well, obviously I was a lot closer to it on the first one. For the launch, we were in New York City. We were going to do a midnight launch in Times Square, and it was a weird time, actually. It was just a few months after 9/11, and the police were still really nervous about getting long lines, so people would come out to the Toys R Us to line up, and we're kind of our people putting on the event were kind of wrestling with the people who with the police, trying to, because we wanted a big line of people waiting, at midnight to come in and buy the first Xboxes, and they didn't want a lot of people in one spot. So fortunately, that really wasn't my job to deal with that. So I was first. We did an event with the Rock over at the WWE place, which was across the street from the venue, and then when it got close to midnight, walked across the street, and Microsoft had bought all the billboards, all the big electronic signs, and so they were all Xbox. And Bill went over and started to shake hands. Bill Gates went over shaking hands with people waiting in line, and then opened up the store at midnight, and it all just happened. So it was really a great cap of 3 years of super hard work from people on my team and other teams within the company to launch the Xbox, and didn't really know where it was going to go from there. But it's really gratifying to sit here 20 years later and look back and see that Xbox is still around and still matters to people. And I don't know if a ping pong ball will float on top of the new Xbox or not, but I've seen videos both ways online. So anyway, it's just for me, it's just great to have something that I worked on still be around and be relevant to people.
Thanks for that. Yes, memory lane is good. It's been a while since the first Xbox, but yes, it's still around, and both of them launched this week, which is pretty amazing. Do you think that content makes makes a console successful, or it's more about the feature and the tech behind it?
Yeah, I think what makes a console successful ultimately is innovation. So sometimes that can be on the hardware side, and sometimes it can be on the software side. Sony and Microsoft's machines are pretty similar. I don't want to get a bunch of fanboys arguing about the small details, but they're pretty similar machines. And what's nice from my point of view is they're similar to what we imagined consoles would be when we were starting the first Xbox. Very, very PC-like they've become. With storage and internet connections and things like that. And so on those two machines, I really think it's a battle of software over hardware. Frankly, Sony really had stronger first-party games in the last generation. And Microsoft, I think, has been making some big acquisitions and trying to double down on content, which I love. I've always been a fan of seeing them invest more on the first party side, since that was a group I used to run. And so I think it's going to be much more competitive in this generation. And, that's what we want. We want competition between these giant companies, because that pours more money into game development. And the winners of that are gamers like us who get to play more really cool games.
Agreed. In our keynote, Gua talked about the fun in games and those kind of magic and fun in games. Game genre have rarely changed in the last many years. Every once in a while, we see a new kid on the block. But how do we keep innovating the fun part of games?
Yeah, I mean, I think innovation in the game business really tends to come from the bottom up, and what's great about, you work at Unity, right? You got a big Unity shirt on. So, what's great about the world that we live in right now is that, tools like Unity or Unreal, enable small teams to do innovative work. And then that innovative work can become, recognized by other people and become more and more important. You look at, a game like Among Us, which is, I like to name Seattle game companies because I'm from here, but those guys worked on that for a long time. It was actually out on the market a long time before it really took off, and and now it seems to be having its moment in the sun. And that's one of the great things about the game business is, a small team can do something important and then have it be recognized. Maybe before that, an example would be something like Slay the Spire, another game that came out of Seattle. But of course, there's, every few months there's something emerges on the market and blows people away. I mean, the game I'm playing right now, Genshin Impact, I think is another game that I'm sure a lot of people are talking about at this conference. It's sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like, wow, they invested a lot in this game. And but it's really, for me, when I look at a game like that, it's really the little decisions that they made along the way that add up to make it a great game. And I'm really enjoying playing that game.
Neat. Yes, Among Us and Fall Guys and all those games that are just coming out out of the blue is amazing to see that from small studios especially. Yeah. In our panel, Kjartan talked about cloud native games. Do you think that there's going to be a place in the future where everything is going to be gamed on cloud-based computers, or there's place for console and mobile and other platforms?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I've been hearing this idea that that local storage, local compute is going to go away. I've been hearing it pretty much my whole career, honestly. It doesn't make sense to have local power anymore. Let's just put it all out in the cloud. And it hasn't been true yet. One thing is that Moore's law works to make things cheaper, faster, better locally. So there's a lot to be said for having local power, but having this huge networked cloud is really cool too. And I think it opens up new game design opportunities that haven't really been taken advantage of yet. So you can look at really futuristic games like something like Destiny, right? Destiny really is already a cloud native game. I mean, when you go to bring up your inventory, it all comes down from the cloud. It's actually one of the only games I know of that when you run on Stadia, it's actually better, it's faster, because instead of the client talking to the server and then getting information and then displaying it, it just all stays together on the server. So I think there's definitely going to be cloud native games. Certainly, our company, One Up Ventures, we're invested in several companies exploring that area, including Ralph Koster's company, Playable Worlds. But I also think there's going to continue to be local hardware, and that local hardware is going to continue to be important for a lot of games. So I'll take both. And when I say that, it sounds like a cop-out, but I think it's the history of games. I mean, games find their ways onto technology wherever technology is. It's like we just adopt whatever technology is out there, like a virus, and we spread. Mobile phones, sure, let's take that over. It's like people are always predicting the death of some part of the game market, like, oh, PC gaming is going to die, or mobile game is going to die, console gaming is going to die. I'll take them all. They're all growing, they're all getting bigger. You know, people want all those experiences and more. So as long as technology continues to expand, games are going to be on the front line of growing into those technologies and perverting them for our own entertainment uses.
Great. Yes, I guess we all love our mobile game and our PC game and our console game. Maybe sometime it depends where we are to play those games. So agreed. I think there's a safe world for all those platforms to exist. Sony has been leading pretty much every generation of console against Xbox. Do you think that this year will be any different?
You know, those of us who are real Xbox fans would argue a little with the question. We might say that in the Xbox 360 timeframe, that Xbox was leading in North America, and so we'd like to, I think, get back to that at least. I don't really have a dog in the fight anymore. I can be neutral on all the platforms, but of course, I still care about Xbox maybe a little more than the others. But I think it's going to be a better fight this time. Like I said, I think Microsoft's invested more in their first party, and that'll take a little time to show. But I think a few years down the line, you're really going to see a much more competitive software race there. Nintendo continues to innovate, particularly on the hardware side, which we didn't get a chance to talk about earlier. But I think it's interesting when Switch came out. I think there was a lot of people saying, why do I need this? I already have an iPad, I already have an iPhone, I can take gaming with me. And yet I bet almost everybody here has a Switch and loves playing games on it. I know I do. I just bred my first blue roses in Animal Crossing, which I'm very proud of this week. So Nintendo has some great franchises, and I think more than anyone continues to innovate on the hardware side of things. So I can't wait to see what they're doing next. Obviously, these remote control Mario Kart things is an example of something only Nintendo would do. Cardboard, stuff that they did a few years ago. Again, so Nintendo. So yeah, I love that there's an active battle between large companies, again, because that's what drives innovation.
Great. Congratulations on your achievement in Animal Crossing.
That's tough, man.
I know.
Yeah. You burn blue roses, it's not easy.
Iggy from Blackburn Interactive was talking about how to destroy a spaceship and all that, but then he finished by saying that emergent gameplay is something very interesting. So what do you think about emergent gameplay versus more linear gameplay?
Yeah, to me, it's one of those religious arguments that has been going on in the game business from the very beginning. Is it something like the Quantic Dream guys do, which is very, deep and meaningful and human stories that are very personal, or is it, on the other end of the extreme, Minecraft or The Sims or something like that is, just more like a toy, a sandbox. And again, I'm going to say great. I like them all. I think there's great games all along that spectrum, from completely open sandboxy to completely crafted human stories. And I think they're all interesting and important. And I just think they sort of meet human needs that we all have in different ways. So I think it's, in a sense, I think it's a silly argument to think that one is better than another. They're both important parts of play, which I think is something that human beings need.
You're just saying that you like good games, that's all.
I think you can make good games all along the spectrum, from very scripted and controlled to very open and free.
Great. A question from the audience. Are there some foreseeable applications of 5G networks for gaming?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I sit on an advisory board for Verizon, and so we talk about stuff like that sometimes, which makes me have to be careful about what I say a little bit. But like I said a little earlier, I think that games are like a virus that infect technology and pervert them to our own uses. And so I think that that's going to be true with 5G as well, where faster connectivity, lower latency latency latencycycy more bandwidth. I think those are all things that we can pervert to create a better entertainment experience for us and our customers. But you know, it's the thing about games, and you can see this like with Microsoft experimenting with things like Kinect. Technologies don't always stick with game development. You know, what really makes it stick is when there's a new technology and then a game designer comes in and has some brilliant idea about how to apply that new technology to gameplay. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Augmented reality, you know, depends how you define what augmented reality is. You can argue we have $1 billion game with Pokemon Go, so we've figured out one way to use AR that's meaningful. VR, we don't really have the $1 billion game yet. I don't think, but you know, we have some really cool technology and a lot of people trying to figure out how to turn that technology into the next $1 billion game. So that's, I think, the key is the combination of great design thinking with new technology to create something that's never been seen before.
Great. No $1 billion game in VR yet, but that could be interesting to see in the next couple of years. Emily was talking about AI-driven narrative. That's the subject interesting to me. How do you see that in games?
Yeah, I've played with GPT-3 or GPT-4 stuff. There's a thing called AI Dungeon where you can go. That's just you're completely talking to this AI and it's telling a story, and it's really freaky, honestly. I'd encourage everyone to try it. To me, it feels almost exactly like dreaming because it's speaking back to you in sort of sentences that make sense, but you can just like take the story wherever you want it to go. So I don't know if that's ever happened to you in a dream where, you know, just you have an idea sort of along the way and then the dream morphs to follow your ideas and it's sort of an interaction. That's what this feels like. Ultimately, I think that we're human beings and that when we get into narrative, we need stories that are relevant to us as human beings, you know, about, you know, human relationships or the human condition or things like that. And so I don't think that that's necessarily something that we can generate completely randomly, even if we're doing it through a really smart AI. You know, I think there has to be a structure of really core ideas and messages that we're trying to get across to our audience, and then we can deliver it through this mechanism. So maybe we'll see that kind of AI as filling in more around the cracks and fleshing it out. You know, driving NPCs, something you mentioned earlier, you know, in a MMORPG, it might be okay. But actually creating a whole like novel from an AI, I just don't, I have trouble seeing that.
Another question from the audience. Do you see Twitch as a platform for unique styles of game only playable via streaming platforms?
I know there's people experimenting with gameplay inside Twitch or on top of Twitch, connected to Twitch. I thought Google showed some interesting new ideas around Stadia when they were first talking about it, about ways for streamers to interact with their audience and for their audience to instantly come into games and play with the streamers. There's multiple streamer-driven games right now, streamer-built games that are happening. So I think you are going to see that become more of a two-way communication between the streamers and their audience, and some of that can happen through gameplay for sure, especially through cloud-native gameplay. I guess that's what, so I guess I'm agreeing. Yeah, I think that's going to be something fun for us to do.
Another question from the audience that I relate to as well, and you said some things about that. Why do you think games like Fall Guys, Rocket League, Among Us, from smaller teams with notably very small, much smaller budget than AAA games, are doing so well these days?
Yeah, I mean, everything's doing well these days. That's one thing. I mean, it's not like the AAA gaming space is suffering. You know, the entire game space was growing 10% year over year before the pandemic, and the numbers are quite a bit stronger, you know, now. So so that's good. I think that if all we had was AAA, the business may look good, but from a creativity point of view, things actually look kind of scary. And I've given talks about this before, where I show the top 10 or top 20 games on each platform and what year they were first introduced. And most of them on console are 10 plus years old, the franchises, and often 20 years old. So that's kind of scary. I did a talk for the PUBG guys in Korea, and I showed them how unusual PUBG was as far as you know, AAA successes. You know, and battle royale in general as a genre, but you know, PUBG and Fortnite really is the first huge innovation on the AAA side in quite a while. So we really need to look to the smaller teams that have more freedom to try new ideas, and then let those ideas grow up into the AAA space. And fortunately, that's the environment that we have today. I talked about tools earlier, and how that was important. Things like Unity and Unreal. Another important piece of that is funding. And you know, in the past, there was a small set of publishers. I used to run one of them that that were kind of gatekeepers to what games could be made. And you know, and that was because one of the big drivers of that was distribution. We could only put so many games in boxes. We could only put so many boxes on store shelves. So digital distribution was really key to opening up games for everyone. And now, you know, and that sort of left, well, okay, you still had to go to big publishers to get funding. But now with Game Venture being really active, including the company that I run, One Up Ventures, you know, we can work with small emerging developers, and they can get funding before they're ready to go talk to a big publisher, or maybe they don't even need to talk to a big publisher because they can just get distribution directly through the App Store or Steam or something like that.
Great. Related to that, and also the audience is asking as well, I got to ask, why did you work on the Halo 2600, a game platform that was out of production 20 years before the game launched?
It's funny. I'm getting some congratulations. I'm actually getting probably almost an equal number of congratulations on the 10-year anniversary of the launch of Halo 2600 and the launch of the new Xbox this week. But anyway, Halo 2600. So I worked on the Atari 800 when I was a kid. You and I were talking about you working on the TI 99 4A earlier, before we got on the air. And that was kind of a tricky machine to work on. It had 48K of memory. I was given a talk in Philadelphia in 2009, and I mentioned the 800, and after the talk, somebody came up to me and asked me if I'd seen this new book that came out called Racing the Beam. And so I checked out the book, and it's all about working on the Atari 2600. So the Atari 800 came out, I think, around 1979, 80, but the 2600 came out in 1977. To give you a sense, the first microprocessor came out in 1975, so it was not very long after the first microprocessor. And the 2600 is an incredibly limited machine. It has 128 bytes of memory. 128 bytes of memory. It has 4,000 bytes of ROM space. So to me, that was just mind-blowing, even for someone who I used to write 4K and 8K games, but that was on a 48K RAM machine. This is a machine with 128 bytes of memory. How can you even make a game like that? And that's what the book Racing the Beam is about. And it explains how it's even possible. And that made me, as an old programmer, want to try it. And so I wasn't sure what to do. So I just said, okay, I'll just I drew a Master Chief in Paint. And I said, well, let me see if I can just get this to at least draw on the screen. And after like a month's worth of work, I got it to draw. And then once I had my Master Chief, I said, okay, I'll just like make it so I can move it. And then I made it so it could shoot. And then I had to have something to shoot. So I had little enemies I could shoot. And I had just a little one screen thing, you know, a little sandboxy thing where I could run around and shoot stuff. And then I went to Game Developers Conference in March of 2010. And I just, total serendipity, I happened to run into this crowd of guys, some of whom I knew. And one of them was Chris Charla. Chris Charla runs ID at Xbox, the independent game group at Xbox. And he was standing there with a guy named Mike Micah, who I know, who does a lot of retro work through a company, Other Ocean. And they were standing with Ian Bogost, who's one of the co-authors of the book, and a guy named Todd Fry, who wrote Pac-Man back in the day. So there was just like this group of 2,600 people. And I'm like, oh, that's a coincidence, because I've been playing around with the 2,600. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, oh, I'm just making this little Halo thing just for fun on the 2,600. And they're like, wait, you're making Halo 2,600? I'm like, no, I'm just screwing around. I'm just playing for fun. And they're like, no, you have to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not making a game. I just thought it would be fun to try something. And they're like, no, you have to finish this game. It's like a moral imperative. And then I've had all these excuses. Oh, I'm not that good at the sprites, drawing the art. And Mike Micah's like, I'll draw the sprites for you. And I'm like, oh, but I don't have, and they're like, we'll be your test team. And so anyway, so these guys, basically I walked out of GDC, without a choice, that I had to finish this game. And so I spent the next 3 months getting it ready for a show called the Classic Gaming Expo. And we launched it in July of that year. And the rest is history. Yeah.
That's great. I can just imagine with large AAA teams these days, a team of 128 people would have a byte each of memory. That's good. One last question. We're almost done here. I learned my English through playing Sierra games. So I introduced my kids to them 25 years later. You seem to keep game history very close as well. How do you preserve this as we just double teraflops every year or two?
Yeah, so I like to collect and preserve, and sometimes I'm not as good as I should be, but sometimes write about the early history of the game business. We have two of the very first arcade video games. This is the first video game of all time, so I like people who work in the game business to know. It's a game called Computer Space. It's made by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney for a company called Medding Associates. Before they started Atari, the next year and made Pong. And this is the game after Pong, a game called Space Race, which was another really important early game. I write about this stuff on a blog called edfreeze.wordpress.com. So it's just my name at .wordpress.com. Lately, I've been moving a little bit even farther back. I've been doing some work on a PDP-8, which I've been doing some work on an early version of Space War on the PDP-8 that I hope to write about a little later this year. I'm running out of time. And I just picked up a PDP-11 that I've been restoring, and I hope to do some writing about the early versions of Rogue, which I think is important to the whole roguelike genre, and it has had a big impact on the gaming business. So those are some of my projects in that area.
Neat, very exciting. Thanks a lot, Ed, for being with us today. We're wrapping up the day, so just going back to what happened today, we learned how to make breakthrough games with Gua and a little magic. We now know how to blow up spaceships thanks to Iggy. Emily talked about AI narrative, and then Kjartan provided insights on the next cloud-based gaming, or what it could become. And finally, Ed right here brought us tons of insights, and well, it was great to have Ed with us. I want to thank our partners, Red Barrel, Stadia, Square Enix, Ubisoft, the City of Montreal, and Behavior Interactive for making this possible. I invite all of you to join the rest of MEGAMIGS, from Multiplayer Game Showcase to Play as Anyone and Watchdog Legion. Thanks again.